Ahoy there, this is Derek, the Convicted Cinephile. Please like, share, and subscribe, and follow me on Instagram at Convicted Cinephile, convicted_cinephile to be specific. And yep, I'm here today to do the mandatory what I thought of Spider-Man No Way Home / Spider-Man movie ranking video that I'm sure everyone on YouTube is doing right now because we are whores for views. I'd like to start off by saying that even though Spider-Man may not be my favorite character, he's been a part of my life forever. Amazing Spider-Man 2 is probably the worst ranked Spider-Man movie on most people's lists because it's essentially hot garbage. There's very few things I like about this film. I don't like how the characters are developed, if you can even call it development. Everything is rushed. Harry Osborn is conveniently shoehorned back into the plot, and you're supposed to expect that these characters have known each other for years, even though there's been no development between them in the previous film, because all the producers wanted to do was get to a Sinister Six film as fast as they possibly could, and it turned out to be a huge piece of shit because of it. And the Jamie Foxx character was essentially the same character that Jim Carrey played when he was the Riddler. I couldn't stop making that comparison while watching it. And my beloved Paul Giamatti, although he looks like he's having the time of his life making this garbage, is seriously wasted in this film. The only redeeming factor of this film is Andrew Garfield's portrayal as Peter Parker. I always liked him very much, and the death of Gwen Stacy scene was handled very well, I thought, and it was very comics accurate. The only problem is that I didn't care about any of these characters because these movies were so bad. Not surprisingly, the first Amazing Spider-Man film is next on my list. Other than Andrew Garfield playing Spider-Man, which, like I said earlier, I like his performance very much. He's a great actor. This movie is just crap with him thrown in there doing the best he can. I'm also a fan of Emma Stone. I had no issues with her in the films. Lizard was an okay villain. I just wish he was less like Killer Croc and more like Lizard from the comics. I also hated the repetitive origin story, and this costume just looks ugly to me. I've always kind of been a Spider-Man 3 apologist over the years. This film wasn't so bad as much as it was just hugely disappointing at the time. Avi Arad forced Sam Raimi to shoehorn Venom into the movie to sell toys, even though Sam Raimi at the time wasn't a big fan of the Venom character. The Sandman character never really gets a great time to shine. He's a little underdeveloped. And the scene where he comes back to life as the Sandman after his accident is arguably the best scene in the film. They did the right thing, turning Harry into the second Goblin, even though he looked like shit. And adding Gwen Stacy into the film was essentially pointless. She was just put there to make the conflict worse with Mary Jane and Peter, even though with Harry in the mix, they could have just used that instead. I also thought it was hilarious that they had the blonde play the redhead and the redhead play the blonde. I can't get over that. And on to Venom. Yes, he should not have been in this film. I think Topher Grace as the douchey anti-Peter Parker was perfectly fine. I didn't mind him, really. They could have made him look a little cooler, but what can you do, right? I always thought that they should have had this be the Black Suit Spider-Man movie with J. Jonah Jameson's son bringing the costume back from space like they teased us with in the sequel, and had him fighting Harry and Sandman, and the last scene of the movie should have been this, as the cliffhanger for Part 4. I've got to say, if the worst thing about your film is the posters, you got something going for you. My least favorite thing about it, other than the posters, jokingly, is that there is a little too much involvement with Iron Man and characters like that, but it's a smart way to interweave him into the franchise, and having Tony as the quasi-Uncle Ben character in this film does work out a little bit. I also like that it's actually Peter in high school, and the cast that plays his friends I actually like very much, including Flash Thompson. But as we all know here, the real star of the show is Michael Keaton as Vulture. They did a great job making this character relatable, and they used other villains well, like the Shocker, played by both Bokeem Woodbine and Discount Tom Hardy. I'm just kidding, his name is Logan Marshall Green, he's awesome. And they even figured out a good way to include the Tinkerer into a Spider-Man film. And what would this movie be without the charming, adorable Tom Holland as Peter Parker / Spider-Man? Honestly, this film and the first are essentially interchangeable on this list. It just depends on what mood I'm in, but I do enjoy that these characters are just developed better in this film, And I love seeing Mysterio, and Jake Gyllenhaal kicks ass playing him. This movie does a good job teasing the multiverse into the franchise without having to get too big for his britches too soon. Plus, the Mysterio costume might honestly be my favorite comic to film translation of all time. And I love that they have Mysterio wearing a motion capture suit. I thought that was brilliant. Although the die-hard Sam Raimi Bruce Campbell fan in me would have loved to see what would have been in Spider-Man 4 with Bruce Campbell playing Mysterio. I just gotta say, this franchise had nothing but garbage posters, and I missed Drew Struzan. Everyone needs to look into his artwork because it is the best poster art of all time, and we need to go back to real posters like this. This one starts out right where we left off, and it has classic villains coming back from past franchises, which we see in the trailers, including my favorite, Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus. There is a shitload of things going on in this movie, and there's a good amount of plot convenience in it, which is the reason it's not higher up on my list, but because they did such a good job with those things considered, that's why it is as high as it is on my list. I wouldn't say it's objectively better than the other two Tom Holland Spider-Man films, but it's so epic that it's impossible not to love. It hits you right in the feels if you're a Spider-Man fan. I find it impossible not to like this movie. I love Spider-Man 2 probably as much as I love Spider-Man 1, minus the little boost it gets for its extra nostalgia. I find this one to be just a little bit slower paced, which is the only thing that really hurts it. I love Dr. Octopus. Alfred Molina is amazing in the part. There's better character development for Peter and Mary Jane in this film. I love that they tease the hairy Green Goblin in the film, and that they should have been teasing J. Jonah Jameson's son being the astronaut that brings back the Venom costume in the third film, but as we all know, they fucked that up real bad. They had a perfect setup for the perfect third film, but then Avi Arad just got greedy, and they ended up writing a shitty script for the third part. But the franchise could have honestly ended at this point, and I don't think anyone would have even complained. This will always be the perfect example of a superhero sequel done right. I can't believe it's almost been 20 years since this came out. Out of every single Marvel movie, this has easily my favorite origin story because it's so comic accurate, both with Peter's wrestling storyline and the death of Uncle Ben, and how Norman Osborn became the Green Goblin. Peter and MJ's relationship is very bittersweet. James Franco is perfectly fine as Harry, but the star of this film, in my opinion, is Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn. He is my favorite Spider-Man villain ever on film. Goofy-looking Power Ranger mask or not, I think he did a bang-up job. He is creepy as hell when he needs to be, and he is very sad and convincing when he needs to be. No other Spider-Man villain has had the presence he's had, in my opinion, even Alfred Molina as Dr. Octopus. People often complained that you could see his mouth through his mask, which I honestly never noticed. I was always looking at his eyes and just listening to his great voice. And speaking of comic accuracy, the ending of this film is perfect in my mind. The way Peter's mask is frayed and the way Norman gets impaled by his own glider, it honestly doesn't get better than that. And even though it probably wouldn't have made sense in the context of the film, I really wish they would have tried to use the original prosthetic makeup version of Green Goblin because goddamn, that's creepy.